Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am your host, Aaron Freeman. It's been quite a while since we did a show back in January. You may remember my co host, Matt Carrolley. Well, unfortunately, Matt and I sort of agreed to a mutual parting of the ways over the last couple of weeks, and that's part of the reason why we've been on a little bit of a hiatus. But we're back now, and trying to catch you guys up to all the big moves that the Falcons have made. You know, it's the first week of free agency. They made big splash signing in Dante Fowler, getting their pass rusher that everybody had been desperate to see this team add. They made a trade to replace Austin Hooper at the tight end position, sending their second round pick, one of two second round picks that they got from the New England Patriots in the Mohamed Sanu trade to the Ravens to pick up Hayden Hurst. We saw the team since then, resign a bunch of players, nobody major, but they got their fullback and Keith Smith back. They got defensive tackle and nose tackle Tyler Davison. They re-signed a defensive end in Stephen Means, who's coming off an Achilles tear. They were able to tender Brian Hill, their running back, as a restricted free agent. They're bringing back John Wetzel to compete for offensive line depth. Younghoe Koo, their kicker. Ryan Allen, their punter. A whole bunch of moves that the Falcons wound up making. We know that they lost several players. They made some big cuts. We knew that several players would not be back in free agency, but we didn't know quite who they would wind up cutting to free up some necessary cap space. So they cut cornerback Desmond Trufant. They cut their top running back and Devontae Freeman. They cut Ty Sambrailo, who was John Wetzel's predecessor as that sort of swing tackle. They cut tight end Luke Stocker, who was their blocking tight end. They might not be done with the cuts. Alan Bailey, their defensive end / defensive tackle, is due a roster bonus on Sunday. And there's a possibility that they could cut him before that time in the next 48 hours or so. In order to save about $4.5 billion in cap space. That may help them get a guy like Dante Fowler on the contract because cap space is pretty tight. Maybe it helps them get another player under contract. We'll talk a little bit about that guy. Maybe another running back to replace Devontae Freeman. We know they lost tight end Austin Hooper, as I mentioned. They lost Vic Beasley. Fowler's going to be replacing Vic Beasley. Beasley went to Tennessee. Austin Hooper went to Cleveland. Wes Schweitzer, their offensive lineman, went to Washington. Devondre Campbell signed today with the Arizona Cardinals. So a lot of holes that they have to fill. We already know that certain free agents like Justin Hardy, Kamal Ishmael, Matt Bosher aren't going to be back as well. So a lot of turnover, a lot of guys that the Falcons are going to be losing. And at some point this offseason, whether it's later in free agency, whether they wait till the draft, they're going to have to fill some of these roster positions. And one of those positions is obviously the running back position. And if you guys weren't, hanging out on, Twitter or wherever you guys get your football news from nowadays, you may not have heard that Todd Gurley got cut. And there's a mutual interest between the Falcons and Todd Gurley. And so we'll have to sort of see if that develops into something and whether or not salary cap and, that sort of thing figures into that with whether or not the Falcons can really pursue Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley's an interesting player. Obviously, you can question whether or not his long-term impact is quite there because of the knee issues that he's been dealing with the last year or so. But he's still an effective player. He's still had more rushing yards than Devontae Freeman did last year. He's still a very valuable option in the passing game and provides some veteran presence there that the Falcons are sorely lacking right now, particularly as a pass protector, where the Falcons don't really have a proven option now that Freeman is gone. And so I think that's something that the Falcons could be attracted to. But, we'll see if they do wind up, making a move to get Todd Gurley over this weekend. But we do have two big moves that the Falcons did make this week. They started off on Monday when the tampering period kicked off, making the big trade for Hayden Hurst, giving up that second-round pick, giving up a fifth-round pick, getting back Hayden Hurst and the Ravens' compensatory fourth-round pick. And Hurst has a lot of similar abilities as Austin Hooper. I think their skill sets are almost identical. A lot of people will talk about Hurst got a little bit more speed, a little bit more athleticism, and you'll see maybe if we later on in the show, we'll be able to throw up a highlight clip. And many of you guys have seen that one play he had against Buffalo. But my producer, Brian, is a Bills fan, so I think he's a little reluctant to show that clip. But he had a big 61-yard touchdown against Buffalo and showed off some of his speed. And one of the things I went back and did after the Falcons made the trade was go back and watch all of his targets in 2018 and 2019. And you don't see that speed pretty consistently, but Hurst, I think, again, is a really good fit for exactly filling the role that Austin Hooper did, which is a guy that can work the underneath stuff, can do some intermediate stuff, can, find soft spots in the zone and help really move the chains. And we saw Austin Hooper really become a security blanket for Matt Ryan over the last couple of seasons. I think Hurst has that type of potential to do the same. And of course, Fowler's the big time pass rusher. But I believe we have a guest going to be joining us soon, and we'll get his thoughts on those moves. But as long as we get those things straight, I'll keep talking about Dante Fowler. And I think basically Fowler's a big upgrade to Vic Beasley at the position. Fowler's not the most consistent player, and he sort of got off to a little bit of a rocky start in his career, but has continually ascended in each subsequent year, which is kind of the opposite of Vic Beasley. And I think that's something that you kind of like when you're the Falcons and you've had so many issues these last couple of seasons with Vic Beasley and his inconsistency there. Again, I don't think Fowler is this elite pass rusher on the level of some of the top guys in the league, but certainly a major upgrade for the Falcons, can provide a lot more of that consistent speed rush than Beasley was. Beasley was just kind of hot and cold. A lot of his production came off manufactured stuff, cleanup sacks, those types of things. And I think even though Fowler certainly has his fair share of production that comes that way, I think he also is a little bit more capable to provide that consistent pressure. And I think he's going to be a big impact for this team. And I think the Falcons did a great job adding a free agent to address their pass rush, and going back to Hurst, adding Hurst only been in the league for 2 years, but a guy that's a veteran tight end, because those two areas of their roster, pass rusher and tight end, those are areas that this draft class isn't necessarily loaded with. And you were looking at a handful of guys that could come in and contribute right away. And truth be told, at those two positions, the contributions that a lot of people make their first year aren't significant. And so with Hurst, you're getting a guy that's going to have a lower learning curve heading into this first year in Atlanta than a rookie would. With Fowler, obviously, you're going to get a much more polished player than you would get with a rookie pass rusher, particularly as a speed rusher. And so I think the Falcons, while you can certainly debate and discuss and argue, and many people have over the last couple of days, that the Falcons paid too much for Fowler, gave up too much draft capital for Hurst, and I would generally kind of agree with those folks that say in a vacuum that the Falcons did overpay for those guys. But I think the Falcons were willing to overpay so that they could make sure that they got guys that weren't going to have a massive drop-off. And in the case of Hurst, you're not going to suffer as big a drop-off between Hooper and Hurst as you would between Hooper and any rookie in this draft class. And with Fowler, he's definitely going to be an upgrade over Vic Beasley, while a rookie probably in best case scenario, unless you get that rare Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, Bradley Chubb type of impact rookie, which most people kind of think there's only one of those guys in this draft class, and that's Chase Young. A rookie's not going to be more productive than Vic Beasley was this past year. And so you're not really moving the needle if you're drafting a pass rusher there as far as that goes. So I think the Falcons still have more work to do. As we touched upon, they still got to get a running back situated. Whether they wait till the draft, whether they go after Gurley, whether they go after another veteran, we'll have to see. I think they could certainly still use some more help to their pass rush. I think Fowler definitely is a big step in the right direction, but I don't think he solves the problem. I think the Falcons still have a long ways to go. in terms of really getting a pass rush that most people will legitimately say, hey, this Falcons pass rush can get after the quarterback. And we're going to have to get after several quarterbacks in the NFC South this year. And hopefully later on in the episode, when we're joined by our guests, we'll get their thoughts on sort of what those new quarterbacks in the South will bring to the table. But yeah, I think the Falcons need to continue to invest in their pass rush. And if that includes re-signing someone like an Adrian Claiborne, I think that's a great move. Again, I don't know if that's the last move that you should make in terms of the Falcons. I still think you can add some more help to their pass rush in a free agency or potentially in the draft. You still need cornerback help. That's a glaring hole with Trufant gone. And, you could still go out there and re-sign Bleedy Ray Wilson, which I think along with Claiborne is the top of the team's remaining free agents that are left unsigned. And you should definitely try to go after him. Bleedy Ray, when Trufant was out at the end of last season, Bleedy Ray was the team's sort of top corner and their most effective guy in the back end. And you want to have that veteran experience rather than having, Isaiah Oliver and Kendall Sheffield and a rookie being the only real options and hoping that these young guys can really sort of step up. And you're going to have to ask these young guys to step up regardless, but you want to have a little bit of a stable veteran presence. And I think Bleedy Ray Wilson certainly can bring some of that to you. So I believe we have a guest, and let's see if we can get him to join the show. Russell, what's going on, my friend?
Yes, how are you?
I'm doing great. Did you appreciate my vamping skills as we got those technical difficulties sorted out?
That was well done. That was a soliloquy. Can't even say it. It was so eloquent. So
appreciate it.
We call that in TV and radio filler.
Okay. Well, I'm joined by Russell Baxter, as you guys can see on your screen. If you're watching us live, if you're listening to the audio version of us, you're hearing his voice. Russell Baxter covers a lot of football, a lot of sports. You may know him at profootballguru.com, NFL Spin Zone, a bunch of sites. We'll give you a chance, Russell, at the end to plug all the places where you write and contribute to, as well as your Twitter. But, I just spent the last, 10, 15 minutes talking about the Falcons moves. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the moves they made so far this year in free agency, and particularly with acquiring Dante Fowler and Hayden Hurst.
Well, it's been an interesting offseason for them. Last year they struggled to run the football, and for goodness knows how long they've struggled to rush the passer, with the exception of Vic Beasley's breakout season back in 2016, when he led the league in sacks and tied for the league lead in forced fumbles, and he never really recaptured that. And that lack of a pass rush has been a little bit of thorn in their side. And then you go back to Devontae Freeman, who was a Pro Bowler for a couple of years, and some injury concerns, and then Tevin Coleman leaves, and they lose that 1-2 punch. And last year, I think they were 30th in the league in running the football. So no balance makes the offense a little more predictable. Lots of yards, lots of points, too many turnovers. When you're one-dimensional, football doesn't work. Okay, there's a reason, and I throw out these stats all the time, and some people I know get bored with them and don't understand the significance. But this is a league where you have to have balance. There's a reason that the 12 highest scoring teams in NFL history in points in the season, none of them won a Super Bowl. There's a reason that only one quarterback's thrown at least 40 touchdown passes in this season and won the Super Bowl the same season. That was Kurt Warner 20 years ago. You've got to be balanced. You've got to be less predictable. If you're going to be predictable with the running game. The passing game doesn't slow anything down. And, unfortunately, the Falcons learned that in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, and their, offensive coordinator turned head coach learned it in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs this year. So, but I look at some of the moves the Falcons made. In a sense, I think there was a house cleaning involved. They need to get better running the football, so Freeman is gone. they decide to kind of, for lack of a better word, it's almost like they cut their losses this year. And, they brought and losing Austin. I mean, I'm big on Austin Hooper, watching his progress since a rookie, watching his numbers go up every year. But Hayden Hurst is a downfield threat. Obviously you didn't see as much as him as you did Mark Andrews last year with Baltimore, but you saw his capabilities. And I heard you mention Dante Fowler and the rough start he got off to his career, but he's a guy who can come out. He's played in the 3-4 and the 4-3. Okay, so he's been successful. Then he's gotten better as a player. He missed his rookie season, and that second season when you come back, this as well as anyone. When you're coming off a knee injury, you're not really quite yourself even that year you come back. So slowly but surely, he's kind of found himself. And now let's see what they do in the draft. I don't know how much more they'll do in free agency. I've always liked the Falcons organization. But last year was rough. They had that 6-game losing streak, but then all of a sudden they win 6 of their last 8. They knock off the Saints. They knock off the 49ers, both on the road. It was almost like what could have been.
Yeah. And you talk about the lack of balance. I'm sure you may be aware of the rumors connecting the Falcons to Todd Gurley.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Do you feel like signing him could help restore some of that balance to the offense?
Well, if he can handle the workload, okay. I mean, how healthy is Todd Gurley? He only flashes last year did he look like Todd Gurley from that 2-year stretch, mostly 2-year stretch. He got hurt at the end of 2018, but the numbers he put up those 2 years under Sean McVay were, who they reminded me of? They were almost like Priest Holmes in Kansas City, those type of numbers. And but not as long as Priest Holmes did it with Dick Vermeil and so on. But it just depends. Can he be a 20 to 25 carry running back again? So that's more the issue than anything else. I like what McVay did with him, that he incorporated him more into the passing game a little more than he was earlier in his career. I mean, he's always been a guy who is big play capable whenever he gets the ball in his hands. But there were examples last year where he looked like Todd Gurley, but there were too many examples where they weren't. And I found it fascinating that they just basically decided to cut ties with him. But there's a lot of that going on with the Rams. Have lost some big name people. You already mentioned Dante Fowler. Corey Littleton's now gone. They've lost some premier. They cut bait with Clay Matthews. He was obviously in the latter stages of his career. Eric Weddle retired. What it shows you? It doesn't take long in this league to be a playoff or Super Bowl team, and then all of a sudden not. That's why what New England has done is, unprecedented in the free agent era.
Yeah. And speaking of New England, they suffered a big blow, and that guy traveled down south. The Falcons are going to see a lot more of Tom Brady. Obviously, Carolina also is making a quarterback change with pushing Cam Newton out the door, bringing in Teddy Bridgewater. But sort of, what do you think Tom Brady? Obviously, he's the big storyline of this offseason. What do you think he's going to be bringing to Tampa Bay? Is he instantly make them a contender, or is this maybe fool's gold?
Well, I think he instantly brings the ability to hang on to the football. And I know that sounds like I'm taking kind of a swipe at Jameis Winston, but I'm sorry. Think about this. Jameis Winston has played 72 games in his NFL career. He's turned over the ball 111 times. That's 88 picks. That's 23 lost fumbles. A lot of times you don't hear about the lost fumbles. Okay, but a turnover is a turnover. Mm-hmm. And he is mega talented. You don't throw for 5,100 yards and not be mega talented. And he threw for 33 touchdown passes. Of course, he also had 7 touchdown passes to the other team. So he's been his own worst enemy. It's almost like he plays without discipline sometimes. And, I think he's exuberant. I actually think he's good for a team because I think he brings that passion, but he's got to learn to control that and that recklessness. I mean, he dug him. It's funny, when they won the national championship at Florida State, he had a phenomenal year. And I'm sure you will recall his next season at Florida State. I believe they went undefeated during the regular season and then got, I think, blown out by Oregon in the college playoff. But if you remember that season for Winston, they were behind in most of their games, and behind because he turned over the football. Now, he got away with that in college. He didn't get away with it in the pros. And listen, I think he'll wind up with somebody. We're only basically 24 hours into legitimate free agency. I know everybody's already got their Super Bowl predictions. Not everybody, but I mean, and free agency is already over for some people. Mm-hmm. And the rosters are set. And we haven't even gotten to the draft, but I'm going to interesting to see where he lands. If he waits and to see how everything's so, he might just sit back and wait. He might also have a choice. The Chargers seem like they want to go with Tyrod Taylor right now. You just think about some of the openings and you know what's going to happen. But I'll flash back with what you said about, alluded to with the NFC South. My goodness. So we could twice a year see Tom Brady and Drew Brees, who I believe are 1-2 in yards and 1-2 in touchdown passes in NFL history. We already know the rivalry between the Falcons and the Saints. And now the guy who replaced Drew Bledsoe for 5 games last year when he broke his thumb might be facing Drew Bledsoe twice a year.
Yeah. With Teddy Bridgewater. Yeah. I'm glad that Tom Brady's in the division because maybe finally the Falcons will be able to beat him. They're 0-6 against him all time. So just getting repetitions of playing the Bucs twice a year, they're bound to beat Tom Brady at least one time. And get that monkey off the
I'm going to be interested to see how Bruce Arians structures his offense. I mean, there are people who refer to Brady now as the dink and dunk guy the last couple of years. And that's, he threw a lot to James White. He threw a lot to Gronk. And listen, he's got pretty good pair of tight ends down in Tampa with Howard and Brate. There's no question about that. So I'll be curious to see, Tom Brady a while ago wasn't more of a downfield thrower. And we know that Bruce Arians likes to push the ball downfield. But I think the thing to remember here is that Tom knows how to take care of the football. I threw this stat out, and, it's mostly Brady. Okay. I mean, there's a little, I think Jacoby Brissett and a little Jimmy Garoppolo over this stretch, but I mentioned that Winston turned over the ball 111 times in his 72 games. Well, the Patriots have played 112 regular season games since 2013. And as a team, they only have 103 turnovers.
Yeah, that tells you it right there. And I think you're right. You talked about Jameis and his penchant for turning the ball over going back to college. And I forget the stat, but last year, I think he had like 7 picks in the first 3 minutes of games. And he was just constantly digging the Bucs into a hole that they had to climb out of. And unfortunately for them, because of Jameis's ability to, sling it around the yard and whatnot, they were able to successfully do that, enough times to approach 500. But obviously that's not going to be the case with Tom Brady, who's going to definitely protect the ball. And I think you're right. I think people talk about his fit in the Bruce Arians offense. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. I think, he's not going to be dropping back and doing 7-step drops and just chucking the ball 40 yards down the field. But Bruce Arians has been a very successful head coach and coordinator in this league for a very long time. And he's not going to try to shove a square peg in a round hole. So he's going to definitely tailor his offense to Tom Brady. And I think really the key there is less about having the big time arm. And it's more just being able to anticipate throws on the intermediate and deeper level. And certainly Tom Brady has that in abundance. But I want to turn the conversation to the Carolina Panthers and their new quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater. What do you think Bridgewater's going to bring? Is he potentially an upgrade over Cam Newton? Is this a lateral move? Is this a downgrade? Where do you see this headed for the Panthers?
I don't know if this is necessarily an upgrade, but to me, for Cam Newton the last year and a half, it's been a matter of health. It's a matter of having a healthy quarterback. You go back to that Thursday night game in 2018 at Pittsburgh when he took the shot from T.J. Watt, suffered the shoulder injury, had offseason shoulder surgery. Then all of a sudden he had a foot injury in the preseason. That was really what shelved him after 2 games. So I think it's, if we remember Kyle Allen early on when he was filling in, he was very, very effective early on, I think mainly because he was a healthy body. Cam Newton's played a lot of football since coming into the league in 2011, and he's a big guy. I'm not saying his offensive line has always been great, but he's also a guy who moves downfield. And I think because of his size, he's willing to take on tacklers a little more than some other guys. So, it's almost like, how healthy is Cam Newton? I was a little mystified, honestly, by the move because, if you heard Matt Rule earlier in the year, there was talk like, I'm looking forward to working with Cam Newton. Well, obviously that was not the case. A little bit of a smokescreen, I guess. And, a little thing about Matt Rule, and I don't know that much about him because I don't get to see as much college football, but Matt Rule is the first head coach in the history of the Panthers to be an offensive guy. That obviously they haven't been around that long, since 1995, but you look at their legacy, even Perry Fewell, who came in for Ron Rivera at the end of the year as the interim coach, he's a defensive guy as well. So you see what they have, but you're also looking at the departure list for the Carolina Panthers. And it's a team that lost their last 8 games last year. Their defense really fell upon hard times. Kuechly is now retired. They let Greg Olsen go. He wound up in Seattle. There's a real house cleaning going on in there. And, it's funny. You look at Atlanta and Carolina, who seem to really be sorting out their rosters, and you look at New Orleans and Tampa, one who's making a major upgrade at quarterback and one that's, for the most part, staying pat, although they brought back a very, very familiar face from years ago in Malcolm Jenkins.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see how it all goes in the NFC South. And, the Saints have been at the top the last couple of years and haven't quite taken advantage of that in January, much to the delight of Falcon fans across the world. And, Carolina is interesting because they are seemingly in the midst of a rebuilding phase. And I do wonder if they sort of see Teddy Bridgewater as the guy that's the long-term piece there, or is he just simply a bridge to eventually, at some point in time, Matt Rule and Joe Brady are going to get their sort of the quarterback that's sort of their dream scenario, that they can sort of do what Cam Newton was and for the next decade be sort of the franchise guy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you bring in somebody like Teddy Bridgewater because you know what you get. A guy who has not put up phenomenal numbers, but is also a guy that, hasn't played a lot of football the last 3 or 4 years. He suffered that, devastating, what some people thought was a career-ending knee injury that one summer, forced the Vikings to go out and get Sam Bradford. And then we didn't see Teddy Bridgewater for a while. And then, obviously with Breeze, we saw him, fill in spots, when they were resting Breeze at the end of the year. And then last year he's thrust into action, and he was a good caretaker, and I think that's what they're very much like Tampa Bay, but in a different way. I don't know if I'm going to win games, but I'm certainly not going to give away games. Okay. And the Bucs have been doing it. I mean, the Bucs the last 2 years have led the league in turnovers. Even when Ryan Fitzpatrick was filling it for Jameis Winston, he was turning over the ball left and right as well. So there's a sloppiness with that team. And I think they certainly don't want to have that. If you're going to bring in a young guy, and they do have Will Grier there, a young quarterback, now, but it's a new regime. So how high is the new regime on Will Grier? I remember when the Bengals brought in or drafted Carson Palmer, number 1 overall, back in 2003. He never saw the field at all as a rookie, not one snap. During the regular season, they started John Kitna all year. And I remember Marvin Lewis saying later that he was just trying to get the team to win. Okay. So you want to kind of change the attitude. And it's been a rough 4-year stretch for the Panthers. Listen, they won the NFC South 3 years in a row, albeit one year they were 7-8-1. They went to the Super Bowl in 2015. Since then, they've had 3 losing seasons in 4 years. And this is still a franchise, as crazy as it sounds, that's never had back-to-back winning seasons in its entire history. That's even before Cam Newton and Ron Rivera got there.
Yeah. That was a thing that plagued the Falcons for very long until they were able to sort of finally break that after 40 some odd years, basically a decade ago. And,
well, it took the Saints 20 years to have a winning season, if you remember early in there. Yeah, I mean, it took them their 21st year of existence. They finally had a winning season.
And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't get off to the greatest start as a franchise either. So,
well, no, they still hold the NFL record for consecutive losses, 26. One of my favorite ironic numbers. It took them 27 games to win one game, Aaron. Okay. And do you know what year they won their Super Bowl? Their 27th year of existence.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds funny.
Yeah. I like that. So, Russell, I'm curious to get your thoughts on all the other moves going around the league. Is there anything else that's catching your eye? Everybody talks about winning the offseason, but do you feel like a team has kind of moved the needle, at least in this first 24 hours of free agency, to really help their chances this upcoming season?
I like what Miami's doing, because there was so much talk about this tanking thing with Miami. And trust me, when you saw them play their first 7 games this year, you were trying to figure out what the hell they were doing. Okay. But if you saw them at the end of the previous season, before Brian Flores got there, they were pretty awful as well. Okay. I mean, I want to say their last 3 games of 2018, they gave up 100 points in 3 games, a total 100 points in 3. Last year, they gave up the most points in the league. But last year, they were also 5-4 in their last 9 games after being 0-7. They beat the Eagles. They beat the Patriots in Foxborough. And I think slowly but surely, Brian Flores' message was getting across about what they wanted to do. So they've gone out, and he's, just like Matt Patricia's grabbed some former Patriots, so has Brian Flores and Chris Greer. They've grabbed some guys. They still have some cap room. They still have a bevy of draft choices. So they're going to be able to reconfigure their team with a combination of veterans and youth. And I'm not sure what they're going to do quarterback-wise. They've got Fitzpatrick. Josh Rosen's obviously still there as well. But it's hard not to like what they've done so far. And it's funny, because I'm not a guy who looks at teams with a lot of free agent choices and says, well, they won the offseason or they saw it. I mean, I like Miami doing what they're doing in terms. I wrote a piece about them quietly. It's weird. They're kind of under the radar despite signing all these guys, mainly because most of the NFL world is still talking about Tom Brady, or they're talking about how did Bill O'Brien let DeAndre Hopkins get away for the price they did, or they're talking about Phillip Rivers going to Indianapolis. So Miami, very, very quietly. I also like what Buffalo's doing, to be honest with you, as well, because Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane are bringing in guys they know. Okay, AJ Klein, Josh Norman, Vernon Butler, who wasn't part of the Super Bowl team. He was there the year after, but he was a guy that McDermott certainly knows, and so on. Mario Addison. So it's almost like a reunion up in Buffalo with the Carolina guys. And that's what free agency really is, as you know. I always call it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's, you bring in guys that you try to connect the dots. That's why Matt Patricia's got 3 former Patriots. Brian Flores has got 3 former Patriots. The only person that doesn't have former Patriots right now are the Patriots.
Yeah. Well, Russell, I appreciate talking football with you in free agency and whatnot. Go ahead, plug where people can hit you up on Twitter. I always loved your interesting historical facts that you tweet out on a regular basis, and where the websites you have upcoming content at.
Oh, I thank you very much, sir. Bax Football Guru is my Twitter account. Another Twitter account I have is called PFG Vibe. That's Pro Football Guru VIBE, which is voice insights and Baxter's expertise. That's with my co-host Julie Boyd, and you can follow her at Julie Noted _PFG. You can find me on NFL Spin Zone, Fansided, Elite Sports New York, and I just started doing some stuff for Full Press Coverage as well. The website is siprofootballguru.com. But as I tell everybody, and almost in a Liam Neeson-like way, if you follow me on Twitter, whatever I write, you're going to get it. It's up to you whether you want to read it or not.
Absolutely. Russell, I really appreciate it. We'll have to do it again, perhaps during the season.
Call me in 10 minutes. We can do it again.
Okay. I'll definitely do that. All right, man. Have a good night, my friend.
All right. Take care.
So we have another guest who's going to share some deeper insights into the Carolina Panthers. Maybe piggyback on a little bit of Russell was talking about with what the Panthers are doing. Tony Dunn from Cat Chronicles. You can check Cat Chronicles out on what days you guys run, Tony?
Tuesday night, 9 p.m.
Okay. So
for the C3 Panthers podcast, right? We've been in this game. I'd like to congratulate you for still grounding and pounding this game. I feel like, when did you get into this world of internet podcasting?
Ooh, this show goes back to 2013, but it's probably the first podcast I ever was on, or going back when it was not podcasting, it was radio, was, I don't know, like 04 maybe or something like that.
Wow. Yeah, we've been running the same internet circles though since 2013 when we got our show.
Yeah. So Tony, I want to get your thoughts on Carolina's sort of move to push Cam Newton out the door, longtime franchise quarterback, face of that franchise. Obviously, there's been some mixed signals about whether or not Cam wanted out and the team was ready to move on from him. They obviously brought in Teddy Bridgewater. Just lay out how you think that whole situation went down and what are your thoughts on it?
It's emotional for so many of us, is that Cam Newton has been the heart and soul of this Carolina Panthers team for a decade. He made us relevant. He's a first superstar, I still argue, in Charlotte sports history. And I know people will say it's Larry Johnson or Alonzo Mourning from back in the day, but I think Cam Newton has been the first star that has been an international or transcendent type star and icon, as he described he would be, right? And he's meant everything to us for so long. So this is an emotional moment for fans, and we're kind of I think at this point a little heartbroken. We kind of got left at the altar type feeling by the organization when it comes to Cam Newton. Now, Cam Newton has had some injury issues over the last several seasons, 3 seasons. It's been 2 times with the shoulder, and then this Liz Frank injury that he suffered last year. And the team, I don't know how they've handled it. They certainly haven't seemed to have found any advantage in this moment. The zero trade value at this point. They asked Cam to go seek his own trade, and there's kind of just a lack of clarity on what the direction of the organization is trying to do at this moment. Is it a full reboot? Is it a retool? And so many of us thought that it just made sense for Cam Newton to be the quarterback in 2020 and in a prove-it year to the entire NFL. But they decided to go a different direction right now and not wait. I think maybe that has something to do with his weight. It's always waiting on Cam for the last couple of years. And now Teddy Bridgewater is at the helm, and it's sad for Teddy because we love Cam so much that we've actually kind of taken a little bit out on him.
Yeah, you talk about Teddy. Obviously, you got the opportunity to see him playing in New Orleans last year, have a little bit of success. I think he went 5-0, replacing Drew Brees last year when he was out with that thumb injury. Obviously, Teddy goes back to having some success in Minnesota, where he looked like he was starting to come on and become one of the better quarterbacks in the league, then suffered that sort of devastating knee injury, and that sort of disrupted his career. Obviously, as you say, emotional sort of situation given the changing of the guard here, but sort of without that emotion in it, what are your thoughts on sort of what Teddy Bridgewater can do in this Joe Brady led offense? Because I know once the Panthers hired Joe Brady, there was a lot of excitement in Carolina for what he could bring to that offense.
Yeah, there's the novelty of the new guys in Matt Rule and Joe Brady that brings that excitement, the youth, the energy that they bring. And Teddy Bridgewater is probably the most ideal situation for the Carolina Panthers outside of, for us that think it should be Cam Newton, right? And Teddy gives you the freedom in this draft to not feel compelled to pick the successor to Cam immediately. But if that's Justin Herbert or somebody that they truly believe, maybe Tua slips, doubtful in these scenarios, but you still have the freedom to make that choice, but you don't have to be backed into the corner like teams like in the past, like a Jacksonville with Blake Bortles felt obligated in that pick or second pick or whatever they picked him. So Teddy, his familiarity is actually is a big plus in this scenario, is that him and Joe Brady have they've have experience together. They know each other at the very least. They were both, Teddy was not playing 2 years ago when Joe Brady was part of that team, in the room. But you got to believe that an assistant offensive guy like Joe Brady, who's there to soak it all up, is probably rubbing elbows with a guy like Teddy Bridgewater in the meetings. It's doubtful Joe Brady was spending his day with Drew Brees. So that familiarity, I think, is a big plus for making this transition smoother than it may have been otherwise. Also, given the current climate with closing of all sports, right, and the coronavirus and the limitations that is going to put on OTAs, and potentially we don't know where this is going to put the team, is having a guy that understands the concepts that Joe Brady is probably building his offense around seems like a big plus. And hey, Teddy, I've always been a big fan of Teddy, and that's one of the hard parts about this for us, is that I never dislike. I'm so emotional. I pick my favorites. I pick the guys I like. I pick the guys I don't like, and I own it too. And I always favored Teddy Bridgewater. I always felt like he got the shaft, and the shaft that ultimately comes to black quarterbacks, period. And that is that Teddy's not even the athletic quarterback. He's not the guy that is the Cam Newton, Mike Vick athleticism, such a big part of the game. Is Teddy's actually more of a traditional style quarterback, but somehow after a monster season in Louisville, people believe like all of a sudden, his small hands would prevent him from being successful. And he's one of the better quarterbacks in that class. So I've always rooted for his success. I just didn't foresee an era where Kirk Cousins would make $1 gajillion, Teddy Bridgewater would be the starting quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, and Cam Newton would have no home.
Yeah. I want to ask you about sort of the losses that Carolina suffered on the defense. Obviously, none bigger than Luke Kuechly. But is it a situation where this Carolina team, where their identity has largely been for the last decade being this defensive-minded, defensive-first team, that they might start to transition into matching more what the rest of the NFC South is, which is more of this offensive-driven team?
Well, I think at this point they may not have a choice, and that is the only players that have any credibility on this team really are on the offensive side of the ball, and half of those are unproven potential guys or young guys. So, I mean, obviously Christian McCaffrey being the best running back, or one of the top best players in the NFL, just period. It doesn't matter the position you want to classify it in. Historic season, 1,000. So we know, I mean, we got that asset, and, you see some promise in DJ Moore. People continue to believe that Curtis Samuel is the greatest receiver that hasn't ever caught a ball, and so there is that. I think you could make it work a little bit on the offense. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm struggling to tell you a person's name, and I'm kidding. Obviously, I know of certain players, whether it be KK, who has been so important to us in the past, suffering from injury, the re-signing of Trey Boston, but the exodus of players on the defense, the holes there. We could pick 7 defensive players in the draft and still have like 5 holes on this defense. So I don't know if there's a choice to it. I sure hope that we're not a team that believes that everything should go offense, because I still believe balance is what it takes to win in the NFL. You might have an advantage on one side of the ball, never going to be equal, but rarely do you see teams with bad defenses win in the long term.
One of our viewers is asking me to ask you, who is the Panthers' current top defensive player? Is it Short? Is it Brian Burns? Is it Shaq Thompson?
Brian Burns. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Brian Burns to me. Shaq Thompson, hopefully he is going to be what we all want him and need him to be at this point, because he's the only linebacker on the team. He's the only guy on the team that has like any experience, to be honest. KK Short, it's been a couple of years since he's been dominant. That guy is a great player. But Burns was such an impact player last year on such a limited time. On one hand, you're expecting a guy that you want to see him progress and become one of the dominant players, which his Pro Football Focus numbers suggest he was in those snaps and what you think you can see. But, there's always that, hey, it's a small sample set and you just hope it's not Vic Beasley.
Nice.
Sorry. I mean, sorry, but you guys actually are harder on Vic Beasley than people outside of Atlanta were.
Yeah. No, I'm one of the softies when it comes to Vic Beasley. I was very hard on him early in his career, but then when the table sort of turned on him, I was like, hey, hey guys, let's calm down a little bit. Let's pump the brakes a little. But this is a Falcon show, and I am curious to get your thoughts on the moves the Falcons made. You talk about Vic Beasley. They went out and got Dante Fowler to upgrade the pass rush and replace Vic Beasley. They went out and made a trade for a tight end and Hayden Hurst to replace Austin Hooper. I'm curious, from your perspective, from Panthers' perspective, what do you think of the Falcons' move so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see the Falcons haven't overdone it, and that would be some of my kind of criticisms in the past of how their general managers have done it. Is like a little too knee-jerk in many directions, and I think that Fowler is a good, solid player in addition that has always just produces, despite somehow always kind of having some sort of cloud around him that he doesn't practice. I just have never heard like Dante Fowler is this gem, but he really is a production guy. And he's been available for when he's been out on the field. And I think that availability is important. Hayden Hurst, isn't he old already though?
Yeah, he's going to be 27, I think, this summer.
Okay. It's better than having to pay. I think that's better than having to pay a ton to the guy. Was it Hooper you guys just lost?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think right now I'm still waiting kind of to see how it unfolds. But, really for the Falcons, to me, is never the personnel. You guys have actually been okay. And personnel wise, I know you guys are always complaining about the offensive line and the defensive front. But, you've had so many staples, you still have them. And it's just you don't know what you're going to get on Sundays sometimes with that Falcons team. And you kind of expected them to be better over the last couple of years. So it's less about – I don't know if I'll be awed by any personnel decisions. It's more as just seeing what Quinn is going to do in this year and how they're going to respond to some of the adversity they've faced in the past couple of years when they thought they were on the precipice of being good.
Yeah, I think you summarized a lot of feelings that Falcon fans have, because, you see sort of this, I don't know, last season was the tale of two seasons. They start off 1-7, they finish 6-2. You're wondering, are they the 1-7 team? Are they the 6-2 team? Are they somewhere in between those two things, you know? And it seems because they've had a tight cap situation the last couple of years, having paid a bunch of players, and they pushed some of those guys out the door this offseason with Devontae Freeman and Desmond Trufant. Didn't pay Austin Hooper, which the last couple of off seasons they would have definitely made it a priority to pay him. So it seems like they're trying to get out of the pay big money to some of their own guys business. And, you know, now they're kind of the backs against the wall, and they got to go out there and win this season. And
well, yeah,
you know,
I think it was admirable that Quinn, that they kept Quinn. You know, I thought Dan Quinn was done. I really did.
I did too.
You know, is that it was so kind of it just everybody looked so lost at certain moments, and he almost looked beaten and fatigued on the side. You know, and he's firing coaches in the offseason, and you know, just what you thought was going to be that steady defensive thump that he was supposed to bring from Seattle just has kind of been erratic. And, you know, that's hard for defensive coaches to survive that environment. You know, if your defense isn't dominant on a defensive team, that's a problem. And we've seen that with the Carolina Panthers and Ron Rivera. And I think a real great challenge to defensive coaches, and I'm not smart enough to know how deep this goes, but when you're a defensive coach and you got to get an offensive coordinator like a Mike Shanahan that is the next level. But those guys are always going to leave. They're always going to move on to these greener pastures, and you're going to always have that element of turnover if you're a team that's a defensive head coach with success. Those guys are going to leave. And so I guess the benefit of being a head coach that's offensive oriented is you don't leave because you're the head coach. And so I think that, you know, Dan Quinn has been, you know, reeling to find that replacement still. And that has been a big disaster, I think, for you guys.
Yeah. And you talk about that with Carolina, and you guys had a number of offensive coordinator changes over the last, you know, 9 years that Ron Rivera is there. But until, you know, recently, you've consistently been able to have pretty strong defensive performance over the last, 7 out of the last 9 years, you know, starting in 2013 when you had that big uptick there. And so that provides some of that stability that you're talking about. When you do lose those offensive coordinators, you can still go back and rely on your defense to keep you in games, so that you don't need to have as potent an offense as you may have had with that, you know, hot head coach like a Kyle Shanahan. And the Falcons just haven't had that. And so because of their team has kind of gone where their offense is taking them, because they just don't have that stability, you know, that anchor on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll see if they figure out how to turn it around and get that stability. They had a lot of success in the second half of 2019 defensively. It was the first time ever,
right?
You know, since like 1998, this century, that they had a pretty good defense. So they're.
Let me ask you a question. I want to ask you a question about the Falcons, that were actually about the division now with the entrance of Tom Brady. Really there is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You saw some signs of life in them last year. And I think that's being rude, is that they lost a bunch of games by one score. They had a quarterback that couldn't see down the field, right? And is turning the ball over like crazy, 30 interceptions. And then you got the Saints there, who have just been the dominant force in our division for the last couple of years. How do you think the division shakes out? Clearly, the Panthers at the bottom, and it looks like it could be for more than, you know, we're used to up and down in the NFC East, the NFC South, but you know, the Panthers could be the cellar dwellers for a year or 2 or 3 to come. How do you think the changes have affected the division?
Well, you know, you always got to give the reigning division champ the benefit of the doubt and say the Saints are still the team to beat. And
got a better defense than they've ever had.
You know, and they've mostly kept that team intact. They added Malcolm Jenkins. So there's no reason to, I mean, Falcon fans are probably screaming right now listening to me say this, but there's no reason to really think that they're going to be dramatically different this upcoming season than they have been. So it's really are the Falcons, are the Bucks, are the Panthers ascending enough to sort of overtake them? And, while I would love to be super optimistic about the Falcons, I just kind of think my expectation is it'll be more of the same. There'll be that middling team that looks really good some weeks and then really disappoint you the next couple of weeks. So I do, and we've been saying this about the Buccaneers forever, that they're always the team because the offseason, they always make these big splash signings or trades or whatever the case may be. And everybody's like, oh, this is the year the Bucks figure it out and break.
How many times have we been fooled? We've been fooled to the point where I'm like, I won't be fooled again.
But then they got arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. So it's one of those things where, like, if you're going to bet on the Bucks this year, why not?
Yeah, I think it even more so. Well, adding Tom Brady, but I just think the credibility with their coaching staff is there. And for me, it's not even Arians as much as Todd Bowles is. Really done. He's done amazing things with defenses, and I think that's their asset is that coaching staff. And then you add Brady and the stability. If that defense is anything worth a darn, they're going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, and the big question everybody's going to ask is how much does Tom Brady have left in the tank? And then the other question is how much does he need to have in the tank if what you're talking about with Todd Bowles and the weapons that they have, and if they can make some improvements to their offensive line, if they can run the football, because I know, I've been doing the show for the last hour, so I don't know what the latest updates are going around the league, but I know Todd Gurley's available. The Falcons are sniffing around Todd Gurley. I've seen other reports that say the Buccaneers are the favorite to land him. So, does that move the needle to you?
Yeah, Todd Gurley helps any team, and I don't like the first. I need to be clear. Todd Gurley played high school football 25 minutes from where I live at, so I'm a Gurley man. We were hoping, so I'm a big supporter of him. Georgia Bulldog. My wife's family's all Georgia alum, so there's those ties there. So I'm rooting for him. I've always believed in him, even when people pulled back on him a little bit, and he comes back and has that resurgence. But yeah, I think that all of a sudden you put Todd Gurley on the Bucks, and there's no reason to think they're not all of a sudden one of the favorites in the NFC. Sorry, it's just the talent is really there, and I would be very sad if he's on the Falcons or the Bucks because he would really help your team tremendously, and the success you guys have found when you have run the football has been some of the more successful years of your organization. And that's not trying to take away anything from one of my least favorite players in the league, and that's Matt Ryan. That offensive passing game has been prolific, but it's kind of unfair every week to just hope that they're going to pass for 500 yards and put up 40 points. So that running game is important. And Todd Gurley would bring – I don't want to see him. I don't want to see him that often in my division.
Yeah. So the last rumors I saw that, maybe Miami was going after him. So I guess you're rooting for the Dolphins to swoop in and snag him.
Not for him personally. Gosh, that's the death sentence, dude.
There you go. Well, Tony, I really do appreciate you joining me tonight and talking NFC South, giving us your insights into the Panthers. Definitely an interesting offseason for that team coming up. Obviously, all the teams in the NFC South are having a pretty interesting offseason. I mean, the Saints are being pretty quiet, but there's other things going on. Their coach is sick with coronavirus, so it's not been a quiet offseason for anybody in the NFC South, and obviously eager to see how it all shakes out. And, if we wind up doing this show not on Tuesday nights at 9, there'll be some opportunities for some cross-pollination where I can jump back on Cat Chronicles and maybe we can bring some of your guys over on here to talk.
Yeah,
football.
Sounds great.
Let everybody know where they can catch you guys. And
all right, check us out on any podcast platform you get it. It's the C3 Panthers podcast. It's the longest running Panthers podcast, and you can follow me on Twitter at @cat_chronicles. And worst of luck to Falcons.
Appreciate that. Same to you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for
having. Have a good night. Well, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this show back and had a good time. It's been a while. A lot of stuff happened in the last month, and I know at the end of the season we made promises about all the great content we were going to crank out this off season, but due to circumstances, that didn't necessarily work out. But we're back in the driver's seat. And you definitely want to check us out here on YouTube on Pro Football Central. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like this video, share, spread the knowledge and the wealth out there. Give us some retweets on Twitter at Falcons PFC. Of course, I'm at FalcFans. You can see my handle on the screen if you're listening to this. FalcFans. Check out Pro Football Central on Twitter at PF Central. Check us out at profootballcentral.com as well. The Facebook page is Falcons Central Radio. And yes, there will be content, particularly over the weekends. If there are moves, we got to get a rapid reaction to a Todd Gurley signing, if that's in the cards coming up in the next couple of days. So definitely want to check those places out. And sorry for the hiatus, guys. But now that we're all under quarantine, there should be more frequent updates coming up in the near future. So appreciate you guys for tuning back in. Looking forward to doing some more shows as this offseason progresses and getting back in the fold and getting you guys geared up for the draft, because obviously, that's going to be big night for this Falcon team. So definitely appreciate you guys, and we'll check you out later.